Hello everyone, welcome to Bite-Sized Learning Series 2, Episode 2, and today we will be looking at using guided discovery to encourage self-directed learning. So, what are we going to look at? So, things we're going to look at in this training. First of all is what is inductive learning? Guided discovery is under this umbrella. The importance of self-directed learning, how that aids development, all that kind of stuff. And then the third part of the training session will be about strategies that you can implement in the classroom, which will encourage and sort of like support this behavior. So first of all, we're going to look at what is inductive learning. So traditionally there's been two areas, like two types of learning: deductive learning and inductive learning. Deductive learning is your kind of your bog standard. It's the stereotypical teacher gets up. So class, today we're going to be looking at this. This is how it works. We're going to be you might explain it. Maybe you give a little story beforehand, but you generally do PPP. Yeah, in terms of the presentation, the explanation is very much deductive. Okay, so you give them the theory first, and then the learners will use that information to practice or to develop their own kind of use for that information in their own way, hence production. Inductive learning is very different because, well, I say it's very different. It's literally the reverse. So you will give, let's say, for example, you have an article, it's a report, or actually a report on, let's say, some recent event, and learners need to understand it. So they work together. There's a key part there. They work together to discover the general rule of like the meaning of the text. After which after they've discovered it, that's when you will do a further explanation or develop that idea further. So it's very much the reverse of deductive in that sense. Okay, what is inductive learning? Here's a nice quote that sums it up, which is: to state a theorem and then to show examples of it is literally to teach backwards. In this case, what we're trying to do as we're working with adults is trying to give them the means to look for patterns, look for repeated things, look for kind of things that don't fit, things that do fit, look at the context of something and understand the language better through that context. This is like really important basically because for adults it's really helpful. It's they don't have that sense of being at school and having the teacher tell them everything. So by giving them that context, by giving them, look, they need to understand this. Yeah, you can say here's a news article of what's happening. They have to understand what's happening, so they have to look at it and try and piece together something. Obviously, when we doing guided discovery, it's guided. So we are highlighting certain things and we're building up to it and all that kind of stuff. So there's lots of work that's done, that put into it, that allows that learning to happen quicker. But in the core context of, like, if you're learning about a new subject and you're reading it, you need to understand it through reading, and you're trying to piece together everything, see how it all fits. It's very much the same for inductive learning. So in this context, we're talking about, we are giving them the material, presenting them the material, and then from the material they are learning. After that, then we will explain and better kind of give more examples, etc., all that kind of stuff. The ideal is that we don't need to explain afterwards; they will understand it better. But in terms of the structure, that's how it's done. So this can also be referred to as discovery learning, because obviously you're discovering things for yourself. It allows the learners to give the learners specific context in which they will find relevant examples of the language being used. So reported speech in a news report, all that kind of stuff. It's all good. It can be applied not just as guided discovery, but also case-based teaching, problem-based learning, inquiry learning, project-based learning, and just-in-time teaching. All of these things these are really, really powerful resources for a teacher to have and for a teacher to understand. In terms of how they work as language-based things, it will be case-based teaching will be using case studies to develop their language skills. Problem-based learning will be looking at problems and coming up with solutions using language. Inquiry learning is more about asking questions. Project-based learning, again, it's getting people to work together to come up with a specific need for a where a language intervention might be needed. And just-in-time teaching is effectively you developing a program on the fly with your students, but that's another issue. If you want any more information or a bite-sized learning session on any of these or a group of them in one go, let me know and I'll put that together for you. It is always connected with active learning, which is the solving problems in class. A lot of inductive learning is solving problems because the problem is, how does this language fit? How do I understand this? So that's why that's the problem, and they have to work together. So it requires students to work in groups, collaboratively or cooperatively, and solve the problems as a group. Okay, so we've talked a bit about inductive learning. So now we're going to talk about why self-directed study is so important. Self-directed study is incredibly important, regardless of whatever you're learning, especially when it comes to language, because it requires so much investment of time. But basically, self-directed learning or self-directed study is you are basically the student, your learner, whatever, is becoming responsible for their own learning. Like they're responsible for the direction they're going in. Obviously, in terms of inductive, it's very much group-based. And when you think self-directed study, well, maybe it's individual-based, but actually you can do that with both. In terms of why they link, it's because when you have that inductive environment created for the learners, we can encourage them to create a habit of looking at language with a critical eye or ear, so that they have the tools that they can implement themselves outside of a lesson. Yeah. When they have that and they have that confidence, because that's our job, as language teachers, it's a lot about giving them confidence, boosting their confidence, all that kind of stuff. It hopefully will encourage them to take risks, look at more challenging subjects and materials, use real materials, non-adapted stuff. I've had upper intermediate students going, oh, I like looking at BBC Learning English. I'm like, well, what are you doing? You're upper intermediate. You should be actually just looking at BBC. Like, you don't even need to look at learning English at this point. So a lot of this is about confidence. A lot of it about saying you can do this because you've done this. So then basically any language interaction done outside of a classroom, so whether this is assigned or otherwise, so maybe it's negotiated with you, maybe it's something that they've brought up and you've given them the links or the materials they can use, maybe it's just something they'll do outside of a classroom in terms of for work or something like that. This mindset starts to become a key device in breaking down and understanding the language they're looking at. So this is critical, it's really, really important. Basically, their language interactions done outside of a class are just as, if not more important than as inside. And this doesn't necessarily mean standard homework. It means what they are actively involved in using this foreign language outside of a classroom. Homework is, as I've said many, many times before, a complicated issue for a lot of people. And it's complicated. It has a complicated place in terms of learning because obviously the time demands, the pressures, all that kind of stuff, like whether the material's relevant, all that kind of stuff. So what we need to do is think, what can we do that gives them the tools to do this themselves without us having to constantly harass and harangue them to make sure it's done. Okay, so right, let's have a look at what we can do during the lesson, to encourage both of these behaviors. So putting this into practice. The first is from a very early level, and this can be introduced from elementary level, is to use guided discovery. One useful resource, there are many, and I can provide those later. One useful resource is Trouble with Adjectives, Adverbs, and Pronouns by D. Bolton and Goody. I don't know why that's missing. But yeah, so that's excellent. It has elementary level resources from elementary to intermediate, actually. Um, in terms of more things that you can do, obviously that fits a very narrow niche in terms of what grammar like it gives examples of for guided discovery. But in terms of if you are going to create your own guided discovery based lesson, and I'd recommend that you would for as much as you can, because if you've got a good one and it works, that is endlessly reusable. So if you think like, oh, I'm planning a lesson for tomorrow, what am I going to do? If you spend probably 30 minutes, 40 minutes, it might take longer to start with because you won't be used to the structure and stuff. Once you get used to that, it will be quicker. But once you spend, 30 minutes, 40 minutes adapting something to be guided discovery and then be able to use that in a class, you have something you can use endlessly for every single group, for everything. It doesn't matter. It doesn't change. It's just the grammar is the same. The context is interesting. That's it. That's all that's relevant. The next thing to recommend to put into practice is to use real texts, not adapted ones. Obviously, this is going to be harder for lower levels, but for higher levels, so B1 plus, so intermediate plus, use real news stories, get students to work together to find the meaning of a word through context. So they are working together as a group, as an entire class if you want to. If you have like 4 students, get them all working together, trying to work out what it means, what happened, what does that word mean, what's the context of it. This will do a wonder for boosting their confidence. Yeah, so then if they do want to read about stuff outside of the classroom, they can do that, and you are giving them the tools and the means to be able to do that, and that is critical as a teacher. It's not just about the language, remember, it's about giving them the tools to use that language in the real world scenarios that they will interact with, that they will encounter. And I think there's too much focus on classroom environment. So get them out, get them doing stuff outside of a classroom. It's critical. And this is also true of audio, because they really do need to get used to listening to real speech. Too often, everything is very kind of like methodical and robotic, and everyone has very fake accents. Everyone has very fake speech patterns and speech speed. And obviously, I'm not saying that you need to go out and listen. Hey, these are 2 native speakers having a conversation, and they're speaking at 100% speed, using all the colloquialisms and idiomatic English that no one will understand. But by introducing them to real things like, a CNN and newscast, like something that basically will be on the TV in a hotel in another country, by getting them to get used to that, to introduce it to them and just encourage them to persevere with it, to push on with it, you will create the tools and the willingness to be able to do that from your students. The last one is teamwork makes the dream work. Okay, so I will need to talk quickly about individual students in a minute, but first of all, with a group, get them to work together on problems. Get them to talk aloud about them so you can listen to it, so that they feel like their voice is being heard, all of that kind of stuff. It's really important that they are working together to solve a single problem. It's what we do in real life most of the time, especially at work. We should encourage this behavior, which already exists with them, in the classroom. The other thing is as your role as a teacher, and this kind of goes to my point about individual students, is that in this, when it says guided discovery, yeah, you can act as the guide. Yeah, you can be the guided bit. You are the guided bit. So encourage and hint. So if you're working with an individual student, it's a bit harder, but you can work together on problems that you introduce into the classroom. There's no reason why you have to solve it, like, you have to kind of like sit there and be silent while they struggle over something. Get them to ask you questions. That's the inquiry learning, so they are asking you questions, you give some answers back, you can guide them. So encourage and hint, but let them solve it for themselves, and that is critical. That's really, really critical. They have to solve it for themselves. Okay, so thank you very much for watching. Here is the schedule for the remaining episodes of Series 2 of BTC Bitesize. So the next session will be looking at conflict management in the classroom. I've had a specific request for this, so this hopefully should answer a few questions and give a nice strategy of how to deal with conflict further down the line. Punctuation, an introduction to adult learning theories, why reflection is key, and what is experience design. Punctuation may be the first part of many. I will see how much I can cover. It's a big topic, obviously, as is an introduction to adult learning theories. I will give a brief overview of a few of them. Why reflection is key will be a short one, but very, very important because we need our students to be able to reflect on what they've learned in the classroom. And what is experience design? Well, that's what I will be talking about in the thing. It is very, very important for learning. It's very, very important for especially with adults, it's very, very important to create a positive learning environment. So with that, again, thank you very much and enjoy the video. Bye.